Hey, what's up guys? Thanks for checking out my video. If you're looking to learn Blender this year, then look no further. I've taken a lot of time to explain nice and thoroughly exactly all the beginner-friendly steps and tools you're going to want to know about Blender to do a simple 3D modeling project and do a simple animation with it. And I promise you, if you watch from start to finish, you're definitely going to be a lot more wiser for it with Blender. So once again, thanks for choosing my video, and I hope I help. Have a good one. Hey everybody, I just wanted to do a nice Blender walkthrough for beginners and just kind of show you guys the program and how you can get started and try to give you a nice general overview of what there is to do in here. And so let's hop right into it. When you open up a new project file, you end up with these three basic elements of a 3D project, and that would be a basic 3D shape to manipulate, a light for your scene, and then the camera for your scene. Okay, and this is actually just a real-time preview, but it's not actually a rendering. Okay, so when you are ready to actually render, that's what the camera's for. It will actually take a a calculated rendering shot of your scene, and it will output images or videos depending on your requirements. So with that said, your layers are up here that show you all of the layers of your scene, and that's where you have your light bulb right here. If you click it, then you have your cube here, and then you have your camera. Of course, you can rename all these just like Photoshop or any other program that uses layers. And so yeah, that's kind of the layers function and the three basic elements that you start with. Now, of course, the camera has a bunch of settings on its own, the light has a bunch of settings on its own, and of course, the shapes are completely mix and match. You can use whatever shapes, you can manipulate them completely, and you can do as you please in order to get the 3D models that you need for your project. So, now with all that said, that we know our three elements and we got our layers, I just wanted to explain this real-time preview that we're looking at. Since it's not a rendering, and like I said, it's a real-time preview, it can be a little laggy sometimes. And another thing is there are different ways to go about displaying this real-time render. So that's what these four circles are up here. These are the four different levels of complexity that you would like to view this real-time preview. So you have the wireframe preview, which is the least processor hungry, and it's also helpful in seeing the wireframes in case you need to manipulate vertices that are far back or whatever. And then there's the next level up, which is this viewport version, which is a nice lightweight version of seeing your object. And then all the way at the end here is the most hungry for processing power, which is actually, it applies the real material and it really tries to give it like a preview of the rendered view. So this one is cool if you really want to get a look for what it's really going to look like, but without actually rendering it with the actual camera in the scene. So yeah, the next thing down here, this is the timeline. So this is similar to basically a movie editor program where you're basically laying out keyframes and telling all the objects in the scene what to do. So this usually comes in later when you're actually ready to introduce movement and animation, things like that. For now, we're just going to be focusing on modeling an object, and then we'll worry about doing some animation on it. So and with that said, the light bulb is good for when you are rendering, but we don't need it as we work necessarily, because we can just see the object anyway without the without the light bulb. But as you see, if we entered back into render preview mode right there, you can actually see the way that the light affects the cube. And so that's what's cool about the render preview, but that's also why it's more processor hungry. So if you turn it off, everything just gets default shading right there, so you don't need the light. Anyway, with that said, let's just forget about the camera and the light for now. And I would just wanted to do like a basic model of a sword, for example. And so the object that you get, as I said, is a default cube, and it always starts at the 0x and 0y and 0z position on the board here. And when you click on an object, you have this menu over here under your layers. This is the object target attribute menu, and so whatever object that you're selected on in your layers up here, or if you clicked on it personally and it's highlighted in orange like this, then that's all the settings that you're seeing over here. These are all the attributes for that. There are a couple menus up at the top that are actually universal menus no matter what object you're clicked on. For example, this render engine one you know, this is like the project properties one, and so this is always going to be the same no matter which object. As you can see, it's more like the bottom half of these tabs down here are what is specific to the object that you clicked on. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, so with that said, we're going to go ahead and go to this yellow one. This is one that we'll work in a lot, which is the object properties. And this is where you have the sliders for scaling the object along the different axes, the rotation along the different axes, and as well as the location on the different axes. Now, the cool thing is, of course, you can just go ahead and use your mouse and manipulate these. It would allow you to change those just manually, and it'll automatically change them in these sliders over here. So now that we kind of have a basic understanding that there's this animation tab down here for editing animations, we got our layers, we got our object properties and attributes menus over here to click through and learn all the different attributes. And then on the left over here, we have some basic tools to choose from to change the way that our cursor works in this 3D preview screen. Then I think the next step is pretty much learning the basics of 3D modeling. So let's click on our cube and go over here to the object properties. And I like to zero everything out to get it all to be clearly at 0 on the location and the rotation. And then the scale default is 1, 1, 1. So I set that to 1. Yeah, let's do some basic modeling. And so something I wanted to mention is the numpad is very handy. If I press 1, it gives me this front on view. So don't try to memorize the numbers, but basically all these different numbers on my 1pad, 1 through 9, give me a different view point, and it's very helpful to have that locked in view. And so mess around with the numpad, like 1 gives you that front view, 5 gives you this really cool. If you tap it twice, it gives you a different type of view. So if you were to look in this corner over here, this is called the perspective view. If you press it again, 5, now it gives me this orthographic view. So these different views help for different reasons. It's almost like, think of it like a fisheye lens versus a not fisheye lens. So sometimes when you're making certain edits, it just helps to be able to see that different mode. So with that said, most of these keys you can tap twice and get like a different effect out of them. So like I said, check that out. This is really helpful to be able to rotate around your object so cleanly. Also, I like to hold the middle mouse wheel, and that's how I'm moving around so freely with the camera right now. If you hold the middle mouse wheel down, you get free total camera rotational control. Now, don't be confused with the viewer camera that I'm using right now versus the scene camera, which is over here, which we'll get into later when I start messing with the animation side of things. But needless to say, the scene camera is for actually rendering your animation when things are coming to a close and you want an image or a video out of this. The viewer camera is just this camera that we use to navigate this preview 3D world that we're in. So with all that said, let's get straight into editing an object. So the very most basic form of editing an object is just pressing the S key, which is for scale, and just simply scaling by moving your mouse either further or closer to the object. This will scale it up or down for you. If you were to left click, which is our main click on Windows, then that's how you lock it in. Okay, of course Control Z would undo that, just like in any application. And right clicking will cancel your movement. So if you were going to do something like this and then you're like, actually never mind, just right click and it will go ahead and cancel that action for you. Another cool thing is you get infinite scroll within this canvas. So if you keep on scrolling, you'll notice my mouse actually went all the way to the other side of the screen there, and you can keep doing that. And so same with the other direction. We can go small, 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 keep going all the way to the edge of the screen, and it will actually loop all the way around, and it will give us this infinite scroll. That's really helpful if you're making really small edits and you don't want to drag your mouse 100 times across your mouse pad. You just keep on dragging to the left, and it's pretty cool. So yes, that's scale, the most basic form of manipulating a 3D object. In order to get anything that is more advanced, we need to go into edit mode. And so to enter edit mode, you can just press tab. And this brings us into edit mode, where you get a whole new array of editing tools over here on the left. And as you see, we're editing the object that we were selected on. And if we press tab again, then you exit edit mode and you go back to this regular view mode. You can also, instead of pressing tab, you can just click up here and you can click edit mode manually. And once again, it edits the object that you were selected on. So in this case, let's say that I'm on the camera and I hit edit mode. See, there is no edit mode up there. What if I'm on the light and I hit edit mode? No edit mode. But if I'm on the cube, of course, and I hit edit mode, well, there you go. Now it's up there. See, edit mode. And there's other modes too, and we can get into those later. But for now, let's hit edit mode, and here we are on the cube, ready to edit it. So just to explain real quick, all of these lines are called edges, okay? Lines are called edges. These are like our hard seams, okay? Edges. Then we have each corner, these little dots, these are called vertices, okay? And then the whole section here, which is made up of multiple edges and multiple vertices, is called a face, okay? And when you're going to select things, okay, this little menu right here has 3 different little buttons here. It has a vertices selector tool, it has a edge selector tool, and then it has the face selector tool. So you have to be aware of which type of, object are you trying to select here. So in this case, if I'm on the vertices select tool, as you see, then I'm going to be able to click on any of these vertices. If I'm on the edge select here, then I can select any of these edges, see? And of course, if I'm on the face select, I can select any of these faces, as you see. And so this is a great tool in order to pick exactly which section you want to work on and start making your manipulations. So with that said, let's hop over to the edge select real quick, because I just want to show you some quick examples. If you were to select this edge here and hold shift, which lets you select multiple things in most applications, hold shift and click that edge, and then click this edge over here too, and click this edge over here too. Check out what happened. I have now actually selected the whole face because I just selected 4 edges that make up that face. The same rule applies with vertices. If you select that vertice, that vertice, that vertice, and that vertice, look at that. I just now selected this face again. So there are many ways to go about what you need to do. I just wanted to explain those 3 different selection points that you have when editing a 3D object. So now that we know that, if I'm going to make a sword today, then we need to think about the basic design of a sword. And that is basically a hilt, and then the kind of hand guard there, and then we have the blade, of course. And so let's focus on this square being the hilt. And the next thing I want to mention is when you're 3D modeling, you can either make a singular object that is all manipulated the way that you need it to be, or you can make multiple objects, like make the hilt as one object and then spawn a new cube and make the blade as a different one, and then just merge them together, or put them close to each other and group them. Shift A, which gives you this add menu that pops up right here. Shift A. There's also this button right here, add. This does exactly the same thing. So you can either hit Shift A or you can click this add button right here, and you get all these different objects to create. There's your camera, there's your light, but we already got those by default. And then here are meshes. Meshes are what is known as basically a 3D object, and it's the default shapes that they have here to offer for you. And so if we were to do a mesh of a sphere, then there you go. There's your sphere mesh. I'm going to actually spawn, instead of a sphere, I'm going to spawn a cylinder. A cylinder is more appropriate for a sword, I think. All right, let's jump right into manipulating this cube. So the first thing that I'm going to do is use that basic scale tool function. And you can scale in edit mode just fine, but let me just warn you, the orange represents, when you're in edit mode, which vertices or edges or faces that you have selected, right? And if you only select this vertice right here and you hit scale, then you can't really just scale a single vertice on its own, right? So now that we've selected one over here and I'm holding shift and clicking this one over here, now we have 2 vertices selected. Now we can actually scale, right? But I actually want to cleanly scale this all equally. So I'm going to actually right click to cancel this action, and I'm going to leave edit mode by pressing tab or by going up here back to object mode. And now I have the whole object selected as a whole. And so now I'm going to scale this thing, but I only want to scale it on the up and down axis, which if you look in this little tooltip here, it says that Z is the up and down axis. So when I hit S for scale, and it gives me this scalable tool here, now I'm going to hit Z, and it will force it to only scale on the Z axis. And then I'm going to move my cursor away from the center in order to scale it bigger. So right now it's scaling larger on the Z axis only, and that's exactly what I wanted. So now that I did that, I'm going to go ahead and scale again, but I'm going to hit X to scale it on the X axis, and I'm going to make this thinner. And then once again scale, but on the Y axis. So I pressed Y and I'm scaling this thinner as well. And so now I've ended up with this nice little shape here, which is just like a long rectangle. And I'm gonna go over to my attribute menu here where I can see the numbers perfectly, and I'm gonna actually type out so that they're both equal. I'm gonna click on this one and type in 0.65. And then I'm going to go to the y-axis and type in 0.65. This is because I wanted them to be more equal than I had manually done it myself. So now I have this cool long rectangular shape, which is the hilt of my sword. And the next thing I want to do is basically add another rectangle above it, but that goes horizontally. And there are many different ways to do this. I'm going to show you one way that I do not recommend, which is Shift D for duplicate. Okay, so now I've duplicated this rectangle. Then what I'm going to do is hit R to rotate it. And then I'm going to rotate it along the axis that makes it go the way that I want it. So I pressed Z, and this is clearly not the axis I wanted to rotate it on. Now I pressed X, and look at that. That is the axis I wanted to rotate it on. Now what I'm going to do is type in the degrees that I want to rotate it. And if you know anything about math, then when you rotate this 90 degrees, it would be this way now. So I'm going to simply type 90. And this allows me to actually type the rotational direction instead of trying to line it up visually. So now I'm moving it up, and then I'm moving it over. And as you see, look at that. It looks like a sword, right? But I don't recommend doing it this way for many, many reasons. The first reason being, look at this. The lineup is not there, right? So I'd have to come in here and line this up a little better, right? So that's, okay, there we go. The next thing is, in a 3D model, you really don't want vertices existing inside of other vertices or other faces or other 3D models like this, objects, or meshes, whatever you want to call them. Like the way that this is happening, which is clipping each other. Okay, they're clipping each other. This would cause, if you made a whole game that was created with objects like this would cause horrible optimization. Okay, so we're gonna just delete this. I just wanted to show you the way that I wouldn't recommend doing it. Another tip, remember that the way that I'm free looking around this canvas is by holding the middle mouse wheel. I wanted to show you another tip, which is to hold Shift while you use that middle mouse wheel, and it becomes like a move tool. So that's pretty cool. Now you can kind of position it the way that you need it. This is especially useful if you zoomed in like this and you need to go Shift and scoot that over like that. So, all right, let's learn the proper way to do this. It would be to click on your object, press Tab to enter your edit mode, and then go up here to select your face selector, okay? Because we want to select this top face that's right here. And as you see, I just selected it. Now, here's a new tool that I haven't shown you yet. It's called extruding. And it's basically taking whatever you're selected on, so either the face or the vertice or the edge, in this case the face, and we're going to basically pull it out of itself and spawn a new one. So we press E to extrude. And now let me show you. By default, it was locked on the Z axis already, because that's just the direction that the face is already facing. Okay. I pressed Z again to cancel that directional lock, and now you get a freely movable extrusion. Okay, just like always, I'm going to press right click to cancel that action, and it completely takes away the extrusion all the way back. Now it's because I did want it to extrude on the Z axis, so I'm leaving it that way. So there we go, I have extruded it. And to be really technical, what I can do is when I hit extrude and it's locked on the Z axis, then I'm just going to type 1, and look at that, it extruded it by 1 unit, okay, which is perfect for me. So I pressed Tab again to leave edit mode, and as you see, it just looks like a seamless singular object, which it is. And so now let's enter back into edit mode, and here's what we'll do is grab this face over here and also extrude this, and as you see, it once again locks on the axis as it should, and we're gonna have it on the Y axis here. Okay, so you can you know, you could do it freely, and you can try to manually line it up like this, but now you're just fighting against yourself. Make sure that you hit E for extrude and let it lock onto that proper axis, and then here's your opportunity to type the value of it. So I'm going to type 4. Okay, that was a little long. You can hit backspace in this case, if you look up in this corner here, it tells you what you're working on typing. So when I type 3, see how that came up? When I type backspace, see how it disappeared? If I type 4, 5, 5, 5, see how it's there? Or you can delete, 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 okay? That's how we know what we're typing. I'm just experimenting here, and I'm trying to get the proper length. So we're going to go with 2.5, okay? 2.5. I need to know the length because I'm going to do it over here as well. So extrude, it's locked on the axis by default that it is facing already. And now I'm typing 2.5. And as you see, I have now successfully extruded both sides. All right. So now I'm going to extrude what would be the blade. And so we hit E once again. It's already locked on the axis, which is great. And in this case, I had to zoom out the camera a little bit, which made me have to click on my click the left mouse wheel to lock in the position that I had this at. And what if I wasn't happy with this? Well, here's a new button for you. It's G. G lets you move whatever you're selected on. This is different than extruding. I didn't pull out a new face from it. I'm just simply moving the face around the board. Now what I'm going to do while I have it moving is pick the axis that I'd like to lock it on, which is Z in this case. And there we go. I've regained the ability to move it, even though earlier I had accidentally clicked. So that's a little better. I still want it to be longer, so I'm pressing G again to move it, and then Z again to lock it on the Z axis. And I'm pulling it up even taller because I want this to be a pretty tall sword. And I think that that's pretty reasonable. So there we go. So now we have at least the basic shape of this sword, and it's just a singular 3D object, as you see, with no seams and no overlapping or nothing like that. So no clipping. So now what I'm going to do is click on my little cylinder I made earlier, and I'm going to press 0 because that zooms in my camera right to it, which is a really useful tool. And what I'm going to do is press R to rotate this object, but I'd like to rotate it along the proper axis. So I'm going to hit Y, and there we go. Now I've got my Y axis activated, and now I'm going to type 90 because I'd like to rotate it 90 degrees so that it was perfectly flat with this other one. All right. Now I'm going to press G to move this object around the game board, but I'm going to lock it to the Z axis, which is our up and down axis, because I'm trying to scoot it nice and closely to this guy right here. All right. And as you see, I can kind of place it manually right there. And so that would be cool. Now you may be saying, okay, but what about clipping? And you'd be totally right. I am definitely clipping this object right now. And so we will fix that in a minute. So now what I'm doing is I scaled it. As you see, you can scale and you can also lock on the axis that you're scaling on. So I'm scaling it along the X axis right now. I can tell because X is red, as you see. And that's because I wanted it to be nice and like similar size, front and back. Now I'm scaling it without any axis lock so that it all scales uniformly so that it can just be bigger in general. See that? And now once again scale it on the X-axis to tone it down on the front and back. And now we've ended up with this cool little shape down there. So in terms of the clipping, there's a couple different things that can be done, and I can show you. So now that we've gotten it where it looks nicely positioned, I'm going to hit tab to enter tab mode on this sword. And as you see, I can't see the vertices inside of this cylinder because they're hidden. So what I'm going to do is enter wireframe mode, and this mode lets me see the insides. Okay. Now here's a new tool for you. First, select vertice select so that we can see the 4 dots that make up this bottom square. Okay. Then here's a new tool. It's B. B lets you drag a selection tool instead of clicking on each one manually. So I can drag this selection box here and select those 4 vertices, which is exactly what I wanted to do. And then I'm pressing G, which is to move them, locking it on the Z axis so that they stay locked and they can only move up and down. And I'm going to move it all the way up to above my little sword hilt decoration, okay? Just like that. Maybe a little bit lower. Perfect. So now that I've done that, okay, I'm going to press tab again to leave my edit mode, and I'm going to switch out of wireframe. I'm going to go back to this viewport shading mode just so I can see things a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is click on my cylinder, press tab to edit into this one instead, and now I'm going to go to face selector. So that's up here I pressed actually 3. You can press 1, 2, or 3, by the way, to select the 3 of those different things up here. I'm going to use 3, which is face select, and I'm going to actually click on the faces that I don't want to be there anymore. Okay, the reason I don't want these to be here anymore is because I'm actually going to merge these two objects together, and we don't need these ones. So I'm pressing delete right now, and then I'm deleting these faces. Okay, if I were to delete the vertices, it would only delete the vertices that are associated with these faces, which funny enough would actually delete the faces, because when you delete the vertices, it deletes the faces in that sense, because there's no, there's no more. But then it also deletes all the faces that were associated with those, not just the ones you have selected. So once again, we're deleting these specific faces only, as you see. So what I have just done is created now basically like a hollow object, which is another no-no in 3D modeling. You really don't want a hollow object, okay? That's poorly optimized and it will not perform as expected. So now that I've deleted those faces, I'm going to change my selector type to vertice select, and I'm going to now select these little guys here. Okay, see how there's this curve here that's no longer necessary, that I've deleted these? What I'm going to do is hold shift and click on these 3 vertices and hit delete. Okay, or I'm sorry, I totally take that back. What I meant to do is press M and press collapse. Okay, so M brings up some different merge settings to merge whatever you may have selected together. So I'm selecting these 3 and I'm pressing M to merge, and then it gives me all these different types of ways to merge it. If I merge it at the center, then it's going to merge them all at the center point. If I merge them at the cursor, it's going to merge them at the 3D cursor, which is this thing up here. We don't want that. If I merge it at collapse, then that collapses them all, which in turn kind of brings them down to the center, which is very similar to center. And then if I do at first, then it chooses the first one that I had selected in my row of 3, and then of course if I hit last, it merges them all to the last one. So in this case, I'm going to merge them all at center so that this point ends up right there. Okay, now what I'm going to do is switch over to this back side over here and do the same thing. Just select these 3 vertices, hit M to open up the merge menu, and then merge them at the center. So now I've ended up with just a few faces, or edges I mean, that need to be merged with this cube. So with that said, I leave edit mode, select both of these objects this time. Before you tab into edit mode with both of them selected, we need to actually join them first so that they can interact with each other. Sure, we can edit them both in edit mode together, but if they aren't joined together, they can't interact with each other. So what I'm going to do is hit Control J, which joins 2 objects or more together. So select them both and then hold shift to select multiple, and then Control J, and that joins them both. And you'll notice they're both one object because up here in the layers, they become only one object to select. And that's exactly what we needed. So now tabbing back into edit mode, you can see that here's my object. It's now one singular object, even though there's a gap between them. And now we want to fix that gap, because you shouldn't have hollow objects as a singular object. So with that said, I'm selecting this edge that's over here, and then the edge that I'd like to join it with, which is down here. And then pressing this really cool tool called fill, which is just the letter F. So press F, and that will actually create this new face between those 2 sections. Come right over here to this side, click on that one, click on this one, and then F to fill that gap. See that? And now we're going to do the same over here. Select this face, this face, this face, this face, and this face, and hit F to fill. So yet another little rule for 3D modeling is that you shouldn't have an object that is irregular like this. See how it's an odd shape? And we don't want shapes like that. And so in order to fix this, I'm going to select this edge right here, and I want to chop it in half basically, because by doing that it will add a vertice right in the dead center. And then what I'd be able to do is merge the 2 vertices to create a nice edge right in the middle, and that will create what I needed. So what I'm going to do is press Control E, which brings up all these special little options here, and I'm going to hit subdivide, which cuts it in half just by 1 basically. So subdivide, as you see, it just gave me 2 edges now, Now, of course, I wouldn't want to leave it like that. I don't want just a free-floating 2 edges, and I still haven't fixed this face, which is an irregular shape. We should always have basically a face with 4 sides every time, if it's possible. Now, of course, if you look down here, this is actually completely breaks that rule because it's a face with tons of sides. And so what I'm telling you here is more like good practice than it is mandatory, but it's good to know anyway. So go press 1 to change to your vertice selector, and you'll now see that there's a vertice right there. And what I'm going to do now is select this vertice, and then I'm pressing F once again to fill. And what it did was it just now filled this section here. So now here's the thing, it's almost like a visual trick that it added that line, because this face is still the whole face that is all of those. So I'm gonna now delete this face because I had done that earlier, and now I'm gonna redo my faces. So I'm selecting this, 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 and this one. See that? And then press F, and I just filled it up. And so now I'm gonna do it over here. This one, this one, this one, and this one. And be careful not to select the wrong faces or edges by choosing one way back there. Do you see that? If you do that by accident, you can shift click it to get it off again. Excuse me. So F to fill that one, and there we go. Now we have 2 separate faces just like we wanted, and they are not going to be glitched or anything like that due to being a face with never any edges dividing it up, kind of like this this round one here, which I'll be honest, it's fine, but there are reasons why not to do it, and I don't want to get too deep into it. But anyway, let's do the same practice for here, which is just select the edge that has no vertice in the middle yet, Control E to bring up our menu, our edge menu essentially, and do subdivide, so that cuts the edge in half. And then go to our vertice selector up here instead, click on this vertice, click on that vertice, F to fill the blank spot in between, and now we have our nice edges and vertices prepared. Now go back to the edge selector up here, hold shift to select multiple things, and select this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge. Press F to fill in the blank. Now come over here, select this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge. F to fill in the blank, and look at that. Now we have all those sides filled in, and they are exactly how we would want them to be. And so no hollow spot, no weird glitches, and look at it from the inside. It looks nice and solid. So that's exactly what we needed. So now we zoom out a little bit and look at what we've got going on, which is this really bland looking hilt with a pretty cool looking bottom to it. So in order to make the hilt more exciting, we can start there. Let's tab into edit mode, select one of the edges of it, or one of the faces actually. So we go to the face selector, click this edge face here, and I think one of the first things we should do is extrude it. Okay, let's leave it along the default axis, and let's extrude it. Let's extrude it just 1 level. So I just typed 1. Now what we can do is press S to scale it, and I'll scale it down. See that? And when I scale it down, I'll scale it down by 0.5. Okay, and you don't have to follow my numbers. These are just ideas that I'm doing. Now what I'm going to do is hit G to move the object, okay, Z to lock it onto the Z axis, and then I'm typing let's see, let's find the right number. I think that maybe let's see, G to move it, Z to lock it on the axis, and then 0.25 is the only reason 0.25 works out right now to make a straight line is because I shrunk it down by 0.5. So it's kind of like, okay, now I don't want to confuse you too much, but essentially the transformation of me shrinking this down by exactly 0.5 makes it so that shifting it up by 0.25 happens to center it out again. And I kind of like that, so we'll leave it like that. Same thing over here. I'm extruding it, leaving it on the locked axis, typing 1 so that it locks it by only 1, or moves it by only 1. Scale with the S button by 0.5, so it scaled it down by 0.5, and then G to move this object, Z to lock it onto the Z axis as I move it, and then 0.25 to move it up 0.25 of a unit. And now as you see, it looks a lot more enjoyable, and that's what we wanted. So now let's go a little bit further. I'll select the new face that we have here, extrude it again by 1. Actually, that looks a little long. We will extrude it by 0.5. That's better. Alright, so I like that hilt a whole lot better. So now we can work on the blade. So what I'll do is, once again, make sure I'm in edit mode. And here's a pretty cool trick. We'll go up to here, to this face. And earlier I told you all about the M key, which lets you open up this merge menu. We can click on the face and we can hit merge. And what it will do is it'll merge all of the edges and vertices of this face at the attribute that we choose. What I'll do is hit at center. And look what happens. It took all of them and it put them right to the center. Now, of course, that looks a little bit more like a dagger, and so I'm going to undo that. What I want to do is just get them really close to each other. So let's actually scale these vertices locked along the x-axis to bring them all together like that. You see that? And now I've created this interesting flat looking sword. And now what I'm going to do is extrude it again, okay? Or not again rather, but for the first time here. So select that face, extrude it. It's locked on the Z axis, that's perfect. And then scale this one, but along this axis, which is the Y axis, to be very close to each other. See that? And then once again, scale it, but along the Z axis to make that point come a lot more close. See that? And now that is much more sword-like. Now, of course, the sword is not so thick here at the base. So that's the next thing that we have to work on, is getting this sword down here at the base, though, to be how we want it to be. And there's a couple different ways to go about it, but I'm going to keep it pretty simple, and I'm just going to scale it just like this. And we don't want it to be too weird looking. There we go. That seems pretty reasonable. Actually, maybe a little bit thinner even, still. So scale, scale. There we go. Look at that. That's pretty cool. Now you may notice that over here we have some happening going on where this side is looking like that, but the other side is not looking like that. So I could have done this all in mirror mode, where it would actually mirror everything I do on one side and it would just mirror it to the other side. But that's okay. What we can do is click on this one and click on this one, okay, and hit merge and hit at last. And what that means is the last one that I clicked on is the white one in this case. And so merge at last, and it just shot it over to merge with that one. So once again, click on this one, hold shift to select the other one. There we go. The white one is considered the at last one. Hit M to open your merge menu, and then hit merge at last, and it's going to merge it to the last one. And now it's replicated what the other side was doing. So that's what we needed. Next up, I'm going to select this vertice, this vertice, this vertice, this vertice, and then I'm going to come over to the opposite side and select these four. And then I'm going to scale with the S button. Pick the axis I want to scale along, which is the X axis, and scale this sucker down real thin, like that. And that way it looks a little more realistic. Okay, sweet. So now I'm going to select this face over here. So I go to my face selector or press 3 on my keyboard. Remember, you can press either 1 or 2 or 3 to select those selection types. And I'm selecting this face, and I'm coming over here and selecting this face. And then what I'm going to do is scale this one as well on the X axis to make it much thinner. And there we go. Now I'm going to click on only this face and hit E to extrude it. And I'm going to extrude it along the Y axis by pressing Y. And I'm going to extrude it on the Y axis by 1 unit. So there we go. Come over here. Click on that face, E for extrude, Y for the Y axis, 1 for 1 unit. if you notice there, it went the wrong way. So in that case, -1. There we go. Alright, and now what I'm going to do is switch to my edge selector, select this bottom edge here, and then select this top edge there, and then hit M to open up my merge menu, and I'm going to hit merge at the center. And that brings it to a nice point. So now I'm clicking this one and this one, merge at the center, and that brings it to our nice little point there. And so yeah, there's that. Anyway, so this is kind of like the basic sword layout that I was trying to make, and so now what I'm going to do is materialize it basically, or add some materials to it. So over here you got your materials properties, and we can mess around with them. And I'm going to add a new material. So I mean, here it is basically. What I'll do is delete this default material. So here's how you remove them, is click on that, and then we'll add a new material to this object. And there it is. It's a material 0.001. It's called that because it just keeps naming them the next number and the next number as needed. And I'm going to make it gray. So here we go. I'm just kind of picking a gray color here. And now it's already gray, but that's because that's just the default shading of the viewport. But what I want to do is go to the rendered view, which will show me how it's getting rendered if we were to take an image of this right now. And now I can see the gray that I chose. You could also choose blue, whatever. So let's say that I chose gray. Let me just run you through these material options real quick. Here's a setting called metallic, which lets you add a metallic look to it, obviously. And so if we bump up the metallic a lot, and it looks, you know, pretty metallic. Now there's another setting here called roughness, which is how rough the metallic is. And if you make it like maximum roughness, then it's like not very metallic at all. It's like really rough metal, right? But if you delete all of the roughness, then it makes it very shiny metal, because it's like super smooth rather. So as you see, now we have like a nice shiny metal sword, and that's what I wanted. So with that said, now we have made this little basic sword shape. We have our little light bulb here, and of course in relation to the light bulb, the sword is humongous. So what we can do is just scale the whole object down. So I hit S and I'm scaling this whole thing down, down, down. And so that's a little better. And yeah, so now let's get the camera to take an image of this. So here's our camera. So now let's just take an image of this sword real quick so we can do our first rendering. So what we need to do, of course, is line up the camera so that it's, you know, even with the sword, so that we can hit render. And so if you press 0, it will put you through to the eyes of the camera, if you saw that. And this lets you see what the camera can see. And while you're in camera view mode, you can go ahead and click on your sword and move it around if you so wanted to. The other option is don't move your sword, but move your camera. So in order to do that, click on the screen, you know, the perimeter of your camera here, which is, you know, or you can zoom out again by hitting 0 to exit your camera view, and just click on the camera itself, as you see. And this will let you move it around. So the idea would be, you know, let's move it over here and hit check and see how that's not right. So like you move it over here and press 0 again, and nope, that's not right. So here's the trick. Go to your camera settings over here, the object properties menu, where you have your location, rotation, and scale options available. And let's just zero it out. So change the rotation to 0 and change the Z rotation to 0, and see how it's aiming straight down. Well, now let's make it aim. I did 90-degree rotation, so now it's facing the sword. And now let's do, you know, you can even just click on this number and see which way it moves it. See how it moves it that way. That's something we want. We want to move the x-axis. See that? Perfect. So, excuse me. Perfect. So, alright, so I've moved the x-axis, and you see the camera's going the way that I wanted it to, which is just like that. Now I press 0 to view it, and see, that's a whole lot closer. You can also click on the camera while you're viewing it, just like this, and then press G to move it, and look at this. Now I'm moving the camera with the G move tool, because I'm selected on it as an object. You can also do this outside of the camera, just like this. See how I press G and I'm moving it around? It's just nice to do it while you're in the camera too. So you press G and you move it around. So anyway, this looks perfect right there. Now what I'll do is shrink the sword down, because it's just too big for the scene, you know, and depending on the shot that you're trying to get. And yeah, so now we have this cool little sword. that is just floating in the middle of our camera scene. And so if we were to go up to this top corner and hit render and render the image, what it's going to do is basically take a rendering, picture basically out of the camera's lens with the light settings applied and the material settings applied on this sword, and it's going to give us a nice image that we can actually look at. So there it is. This is the sword as rendered by the engine. Now, I don't want to get too deep into engines in this tutorial, but there are multiple different rendering engines to choose from. Eevee is the most, I think, computer processor power friendly one. Cycles tends to be, in my opinion, the most elegant looking one, but it is a little more processor heavy. As you see, it also takes significantly longer, and it does give you different lighting effects and things like that. Now, you might notice I'm going to leave, this is the real-time render preview mode that I entered into in order to see the material that it looks like. If you were to leave that, then it goes to this default viewport shading one. So now I want to show you guys a cool trick to where you can really save yourself some detailing work by applying a bunch of different filters that they have. So here's your object attributes section over here. This little wrench here is called the modifier properties, and modifiers are kind of like filters for your objects, and they give you tons of different filters to choose from if you want to look at it that way. And one of them right here is called subdivision surface, and what this does is chops up all the different edges on this object to make it even smoother basically. So if you look right here, this is like really not smooth because it's just like a big rectangle, then another rectangle, then another rectangle. So if I subdivide it, it'll chop each rectangle up into like 8 more rectangles, making it like hyper smooth basically. But this applies to every single vertice and face and edge on this object. So it ends up basically chopping everything up and making it more bubbly and rounded looking. So that's just a kind of a warning, but here's the subdivision surface filter. And as you see, what it did was it basically chopped everything up and smushed them all together. And I personally kind of like this look right now, and so I'm going to bump it up. This little levels slider right here is how many times do you want to apply the chop. So if you look right here, it's applying the chop to every single edge and vertice and face, and it has created those lines that I had told you all about earlier, of kind of like the proper way of merging objects. I'm going to do it another level, and look at that, it did it yet again. And then once again, every time you bump it up, it chops it even more. Every time you bump it up, it chops it even more. See that? So now we're like hyper smooth. I'm even going to do it one more go, and look at that, it's like super smooth, which is cool. It has created this odd little artifact over here, and this is probably due to the way that I did something. If we look at this closely, look at that, I undid what I had done there because I wanted to see what happened. And look at that, you can see, look at this side. This side is just one piece, right? But I have found a glitch in the way that I modeled it where I ended up with an extra middle piece right here. So what I can do is delete that edge. So I click delete, I delete that edge specifically, and then I come over here and I delete this vertice that's hanging out in the middle of nowhere. And same with this one that's hanging out in the middle of nowhere. Just delete the vertice. And now what I'm going to do is retry that. So I'm selecting this one, and this one. Or actually first I'll create my line there. See that? Same with here. Boom. Alright. Now we have our 2 lines. And now edge. Connect this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge. And press J to, or I'm sorry, F to fill it all. Same with over here. So this one, this one, this one, and this one. F to fill it all. And I was basically just correcting my error here where I ended up having, for some reason, 2 faces that were kind of messing with each other. Alright, so now we're going back to add modifiers here. So it's the little wrench, add modifier, subdivision surface. Click on that one. I do still see a little bit of a little artifact happening right here for whatever reason. But that's okay for now. We'll leave it. So I'm going to bump this one up to 5 because that's like super smooth. I like that. And then we can just leave it like that, and it's already applied to the object. And this is a non-destructive way of modeling, as they call it. When you add a filter and you just kind of leave it right here, then you haven't necessarily messed with the object. And let me tell you what I mean. You can hit edit mode and you can still see the original vertices and faces and everything like that, and you can actually edit them just like this. Look at that. And the filter just simply adjusts as needed. But let me tell you, when it becomes a destructive version of editing, it's when you would actually apply this filter by clicking this little arrow and clicking apply. This actually applies the filter and it changes the object. So when you hit tab into edit mode, now you actually have inherited the traits of that object and you can edit every vertice individually. So as you see, now you can do some pretty cool stuff like that, make like a spiky hilt or whatever like this. But of course this is not necessarily the goal for me right now. I'm gonna go back with Control Z, Control Z, Control Z to before I applied that filter and just simply leave the filter hovering there. And that way I get the benefits of the filter but without destroying my original object's wireframe. So there's that. Now we hit 0 once again, make sure it's all lined up, which it is, and we can go ahead and hit render image, and it's gonna render the image. Now, if you noticed earlier, I switched my render cycle, or my render engine, to cycles over here. I'm going to actually go ahead and switch it back to Eevee, because I like Eevee, for this purpose at least. And yeah, we have some more progress going on. So there we go. Now, if you wanted to get a different view of the sword, of course, just hit rotate on the sword. Now you can rotate the sword. Let's do it on the Z axis so that it stays on the up and down rotational. And then let's rotate it to like right there and try to take a rendering of that. And look at that. Now we have a slightly rotated sword. Now, of course, if I was going to go ahead and color the blade, you know, differently than the hilt and differently than the emblem on the bottom, that's all going to be a texture, like a true texture, not just a color material. And that gets a little more complicated. I'm not going to get into that on this tutorial, but maybe I'll do a part 2 of this same sword, just for example. I did want to get into just a very, very basic animation though, because it's pretty simple, to be honest. And I just wanted to show you kind of. So this is your time frame down here, your timeline actually, that lets you set up your animation. And the most basic thing you need to know is this is your first frame, okay, number 1, where it says 1, that's your first frame. And as you drag it along, it tells you what frame you're on. So here's like frame 60. And here's like frame 120, okay? And basically what, in order to animate, you just need to tell it where you want the sword to be on frame 1 and where you want the sword to be on frame wherever. And the cool thing about keyframes is it will blend it all together. So if on frame 1 we wanted our sword to be right here, but on frame 120 we wanted our sword to be over here, then the keyframes will just blend those two together, which is really cool. So what I'm going to do is like a really simple sword swing, and so just kind of think about like the first location that you'd want a sword to be if you were going to swing it, which would be pretty much over here, right? And that's kind of rotated so you can see it well. Now what I want to do is lock it in where it is right now as frame number 1. So these buttons over here on the object properties menu, where you have your location, your rotation, and your scale, we're not going to be messing with the scale. I want the sword to stay the same size the whole animation, but I do want to change the rotation during this animation, and I do want to change the location. So what I'm doing is turning on these buttons right here to add a keyframe where we are right now. And as you see, it's added a little gem over there. See that little diamond gem right there? That indicates that we have a keyframe going on this object. So like if you click on the light, there's no gems because we never made a keyframe for the light. But if you click on the sword, there's a little keyframe gem right there on the sword. And so that's how we know that on frame 1, there is some sort of keyframe going on. Now to get even more info on what the keyframe is, if you go to frame 1, the attribute that has a keyframe will turn yellow. If you're not on that frame where there's one, then it's green, which indicates that there is a keyframe somewhere, but it's not on that attribute on that frame. So I hope that makes sense. So anyway, we're on frame 1. We've locked in that this is the keyframes that all of these location and rotation should be for the sword on frame 1. Now let's fast forward way over to frame, let's do like 200. Now keep in mind that an animation typically goes about 30 frames a second, so that means that a 200 frame animation would not even be 10 seconds long. And so with that said, we're going to come over here to 200, And the start and end of your animation settings are right here too. This is so that it knows when to stop rendering. So since I know that I want the end of my animation to be 200, I might as well type 200 up here too to tell it that that's the cutoff point. So no longer render stuff after 200, because that's the last frame I'm animating to. So I'm on frame 200, and I'm now going to put my sword in the final position that I would want it to be on frame 200, which would be like after it did its whole swing, and it's now over here. So basically swing, and then I think that what we should do is flip it around completely. I think I'd want it to be completely flipped, and yeah, basically just way over there now. So now the ones that turned orange are the ones that had a difference at all. The rest of them did not make it have a difference in this animation. So the keyframe never changed, basically. I hope that makes sense. So in order to lock in these new changes and create a gem, basically a keyframe gem over here, we need to just click that button. So let's lock those new positions in, and you'll instantly see that I've now created, just by doing a keyframe on number 1 and number 200, it's able to keyframe itself all the way over to its next location. Now I will be honest, that looks like a very slow swing, but you know, you can change the speed by just speeding up the video, but what I'm going to do is actually drag this closer. I'm going to drag it all the way to 100 and see how it looks instead. So what I just did was I completely dragged all of those keyframes that I had for 200. You can drag them, so I'm dragging them closer to make the animation happen quicker. So let's do like a 3-second animation. So that would be 30, 60, 90, right? So 30 frames a second, 60 frames on second number 2, and then those last 30 frames for second number 3. So this is a 3-second swing. So boom, right? And even that seemed pretty slow. So what if we were to do just a 2-second swing? So we went from a 200 frame animation, now we're just doing a 60 frame animation, but that does seem a lot better. The other thing is that that's like a pretty huge swing, wouldn't you say? So what I'll do is move it closer. So I'll move it over here, lock in that new location, and then go to this one, frame 60, and move it closer and lock in this new frame too. Alright, so now we have like a much closer, boom, a much closer little animation there. Change the ending position to 60, or maybe like 80 to leave 20 frames after the animation takes place. So there we go. And now, in order to get a more realistic swing, we need to add some flavor to it, right? So what if halfway in between it got like a huge tilt to it, like this, on these two axes, or axes. So now it does like a chop, bam, and then it comes back around. And I don't want it to be hovering out of the end there, so I'm fixing that, and then of course set the new keyframes. Every time that you make a change, you just got to make sure that you make the orange. For example, look, I'm moving this. I've created now, these are all orange because I've moved the rotation on these. So unclick the gem and then click it again. Yellow means it's successfully on that frame that you're selected on. So unclick the gem, select again, unclick, select it again. So now it's locked in on those variables. So now look, as you see, boom, a nice swing. Boom. Perfect. So now if we hit render and render the image, the thing is it will only render just the first frame, or in fact whatever frame that you may be selected on, like this one, see? So of course you can probably imagine, what do we need to hit then? It's render animation. See this? And then what it'll do is go through each one. Now because I'm on cycles, it's much slower, so I'm gonna switch back to Eevee again. You don't have to mess with this really when you're getting started. I only did it because sometimes I like the way that cycles looks, but I'm sticking on Eevee for this tutorial. So now I don't want to confuse you too much or overwhelm you, but when you go to render in animation, you do need to have the settings set up for yourself so that it knows where to output it and everything. And so the output is fine to be temp, I don't mind that. But here's the file format of your animation. It would put them all out in images, and I actually wanted to put out a video for me, so I'm gonna go ahead and select FFmpeg video, which is basically like MP4 video output. And so there we go. I just now selected the output. So now when I do my render animation button, it's going to output an FFmpeg video to my temp output folder, and it's going to be in this resolution that's selected, at that percentage scale of that resolution. So if I did 50, it would be half of this resolution, or you could just change the resolution number to half of that and leave this at 100. You know what I mean? There's different ways to do it. Another thing to notice is the render comes out the size of your camera, right? So by changing this resolution, you actually ended up changing the size of your camera screen. Do you see that? So that's an interesting thing to know. I'm going to leave it at 1920 by 1080p. That's a great size. And now I'm going to hit render animation. And Eevee is so fast compared to Cycles that you can see it happening in real time, which is great. And check that out. That's like a nice sword swing where it kind of rotated around like it should have, and it doesn't clip out of the side of the screen, and it makes it all the way. And here's another cool little idea that I have is after the swing is done, we have this 20 frames of blankness, right? Well, what I'll do is at frame 70, it should just move forward just a hair. Now, here's the thing. See how it didn't leave a gem behind? That's because I need to go over to the object properties. All these are orange, which means pending changes, and click it to lock in that new keyframe at that spot. Then we go to frame 80, and what I'm going to do is kind of shift it back again a little bit, and just slight rotation. And pending, so I'm changing these to yellow, meaning the frame that I'm on is where those ones are stored. See, the frame that I'm on, they turn yellow. The frame that I'm on, they turn yellow. See what I mean? Alright, so now what I've just done is added like a little breathing animation to the end of the sword swing. So once the sword goes through all the way, it'll do just like a slight natural kind of wiggle on the sword. And we'll see that take place right now. Boom, the sword swing was done, and then just a slight little stabilizing little wiggle. And there we go. So now, yeah, that's it. So now view animation, and we can see it in real time. Boom. See that? Boom. Now, I'll be honest, it's a little bit slow still after all of our changes. So I'm going to move all of these back a whole chunk. So look at this. And I'm going to end my animation at 60 now. And now I will hit view or render animation, and we'll see it happen much quicker now. And another thing I'd like to do is when it swings, I'd like it to be at a more painfully low angle. So like I'm gonna knock this down like way down like that. Now it's like a nice deep cut. So now render the animation, and it's gonna go much lower. Nice. That was a good old swing. And then we end it with that little breathe animation there. Perfect. So once it renders all the way through, you'll know that it has saved in your temp output file. You can also go up here and click save as, but this will just save the image of this one single frame that you're on right now, which isn't what we want. We want to go to view animation. Just know that the output already got saved in your output folder. But yeah, there we go. Boom, a nice swing, and then it has that nice little stabilizing move at the end there. And yeah, that's basically you know, my little beginner's tutorial on how to make a sword. I know I covered a lot in this one video, but I hope that you were able to kind of follow through, and I just really wanted to give you guys an idea of what this tool is capable of. It's capable of so much more. This was just like the bare bones beginning, but I completely understand that this might seem overwhelming and hard to replicate potentially for a complete beginner. So I'd really love your input on you know, what I can cover next and what parts you're maybe running into challenges on. I think that you'll definitely be able to, you know, whip some things up and experiment and mess with the animations, and you'll get a hang of, you know, where to position things to get it nice and smooth like this kind of looks, which, you know, I'm actually pretty happy with that animation. I wouldn't be wanting to get hit with that sword. Anyway, I really appreciate y'all watching my tutorial, and I hope I helped. And please comment and like and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next, and let me know what projects you guys are working on, and I'd love to see some results. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.